The Vraxian Empire never expected humans to stay silent for 96 hours. What happened next changed the galaxy forever. Chapter 1. The Medical Oath. The Hegemony Inspector's shadow fell across the medication bay like a curse. Dr. Althea Vass didn't look up from her work. Her hands moved with surgical precision, adjusting in 4-line for a patient whose 3-lobed circulatory system required special filtering. The patient was a signal engineer named Ilya Senator by every metric of the Vraxian hegemony. Ilya was worthless. "You are not following protocol," the inspector said. His name was Roar, and he had the crystalline exoskeleton of a warrior caste member. The data slate he carried hummed with the weight of bureaucratic authority. Althea finally looked at him. She was a woman of 63 standard years, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights in operating theaters on 100 different worlds. "Which protocol?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "The EMPM, the palliative allocation matrix." Inspector Roar activated the slate. A chart bloomed in the air between them, a cruel taxonomy of pain management. "Your patient, Ms. Sun, is classified as bonded labor, Tier 4. She receives 2.5 milligrams of analgesics per 6-hour cycle. You are administering 8 milligrams. "That's correct," Althea said, returning to her work. "She's in agony. Her filtering system is rejecting the dexitins. I adjusted her dosage to mitigate the suffering until we can synthesize a compatible compound. You overrode the allocation matrix without authorization." Althea set down her instruments. She turned to face the inspector fully, and something in her expression made even his chitinous armor seem fragile. "Do you know what the first principle of medicine is?" she asked. "You will not deflect with. Do not harm," Althea interrupted. "Prima non nocere. I learned it on Earth, in a time when humans were still confined to a single planet. We learned it because we had to, because we learned to kill each other so well that we needed a reason to stop." She gestured at the chart. "Your EMPM doesn't treat patients. It treats status. It says a high-ranking officer's pain matters more than a laborer's pain. In my ward, Inspector, pain is pain. And I treat the injury, not the rank." The inspector's antennae vibrated with agitation. "This is unauthorized equalization. It violates the hegemony's fundamental principles of hierarchical resource allocation." "Good," Althea said, turning back to her work. "Your hierarchical resource allocation is a disgrace dressed as procedure." The inspector left, but his report went out on the first transmission home. Chapter 2. The Withdrawal. On the opposite side of the galaxy, Ambassador Alara Voss stood at the apex of the conclave chamber, a space so vast that sound took 3 seconds to travel from one wall to the other. She had been granted permission to speak. The conclave of sovereign worlds voted only once per cycle on major matters. This would be the vote on human representation in the Kepler corridor. "For 3 years, Alara said, her voice steady and clear, amplified so that all 312 council members could hear, I have requested that the Terran Confederation be granted equitable access to the Kepler corridor's resources. The vote has been denied 3 times. Denied without examination of our proposals. Denied without consideration of the data." She paused. Around the chamber, various alien species shifted in their seats. A Daxtheri counselor, massive and many-limbed, seemed to smile. "I have also received reports," Alara continued, "that the hegemony is moving toward military action against our medical station in the neutral zone. The Council has confirmed this, and the Council has recommended we negotiate." She pulled a silver pin from her chest, her diplomatic credentials, worn by every ambassador in the Conclave's history. "The Terran Confederation," she said slowly, "withdraws from all diplomatic engagement with the Conclave of Sovereign Worlds, effective immediately." The chamber exploded in noise. Alara walked from the platform toward the exit. She didn't run. She didn't rush. She walked the way someone walks who has already made peace with the consequences. A counselor called after her. "You will starve without our trade. You will die without our technology." Alara turned back, just for a moment. "No, she said. "We will survive. Because we learned 800 years ago what the rest of you are only beginning to understand. The price of compromise with tyranny is tyranny." She left. Within 12 hours, every Terran engineer, every Terran relay technician, every Terran maintenance specialist began to withdraw from Council space. They didn't sabotage the systems. They simply stopped maintaining them. The economy of the Conclave began to bleed. Chapter 3. The Ultimatum. The Vraxian hegemony's fleet was called the Crystalline Armada, not for the elegance of its ships, though they were elegant, all flowing curves and bioluminescent circuitry, but for their commander. High Arbiter Vax was a being of pure crystalline structure, a rare mutation that occurred perhaps once in 10 million Vraxian births. He stood on the bridge of the final warning, watching the approach to Sector 7739. On the displays, Earth appeared as a blue marble, insignificant and primitive. "Transmission sent," his communications officer reported. 96 standard hours to surrender. "Full spectrum broadcast. They will have received it." Vax nodded. The Vraxian hegemony did not conduct wars. They conducted integrations. When a weaker species resisted, they were integrated. When they complied immediately, they were absorbed. Either way, the hegemony grew. "What is their response?" Vax asked, settling into his command chair. Silence. Then, finally, "No response detected, sir. Minimal EM signature from the planet. They appear to be silent." For the first time, Vax felt the smallest disturbance in his crystalline structure. A vibration, not quite fear. "Clarify. Silent how? All radio traffic has ceased. All navigational pings have ceased. All thermal emissions have reduced to baseline. It's as if they turned everything off." Vax considered this. He had integrated 12 species in his career. 9 had begged for mercy in the first hours. 3 had attempted resistance. All had yielded. None had done nothing. "Continue observation," he commanded. "Full spectrum monitoring. I want to know if a single atom moves in that sector." The clock began to count down. Chapter 4. The Hunger in the Dark. Torvin had always been different among his people. While other Vraxian analysts accepted the certainty of their tactical predictions, Torvin felt the discomfort of doubt. He sat in the deep archives of the hegemony's intelligence division, reviewing old files. The Titan's moon incident, the civilizing war, the treaty of 800 years. The files were thin, as if someone had redacted most of the content. But scraps remained. A Vraxian colony on a moon near Earth had been established in what was deemed friendly territory. The colony had 10,000 inhabitants. All communications ceased on day 47. When the rescue fleet arrived, they found the colony intact, buildings standing, equipment functional, but every single Vraxian was dead, not killed in combat, positioned carefully in the habitation sections, arranged as if they had simply stopped existing. The rescue fleet had fled. "They don't engage conventionally," Torvin whispered to himself. He pulled up another file. The Hunger in the Dark incident. A human food acquisition team had been tracking a virile beast, an apex predator that had devastated 3 systems. The humans had tracked it for 6 weeks across 1,000 kilometers of hostile terrain. Not with advanced sensors, not with fleet support, with patience and understanding of predator behavior. When they found the beast, they didn't kill it at range. They drove it into a specific canyon, using natural acoustics and understanding of prey psychology. They herded it like a shepherd herds sheep. When it died, they had sat on its corpse and roasted the meat. Torvin's antennae vibrated with a new kind of fear. Fear that wasn't about weapons or numbers. Fear about comprehension. Fear that they had brought a fleet to negotiate with something that didn't think the way they thought. He pulled up the current audio feeds from Sector 7739. Everything was silent. Perfectly, completely silent. But under the background radiation, buried at 447 Hz, a frequency that required specific equipment to detect, there was a rhythmic ping. A heartbeat. They were still there. Still alive. Still doing something. Chapter 5. The Hunters. At Outpost K. 47, Humanity showed the hegemony something it had never truly understood. Deathworlds eat better than they run. The outpost had been attacked by a viral beast, a creature that stood 15 meters at the shoulder, with teeth like reinforced steel and the patience of a predator that had hunted the same region for 2,000 years. The hegemony had sent a small security team to investigate. They found 5 humans waiting. "You called for help?" the hegemony commander asked, confused. The area was a wasteland. Radiation pools, methane storms, vegetation that bloomed once every 3 centuries. This was a place of suffering, not a hunting. "No," said the human leader, a woman named Sarah Chun. "We called for warning. There's a difference." "The beast," the hegemony commander said. "How many of your people did it kill?" "None," Sarah said. She was gutting a massive piece of meat over a portable heating element. "We killed it about an hour ago." The hegemony soldiers looked at her, uncomprehending. One managed. "The viral beast has killed entire military units. How did 5 humans?" "We hunted," Sarah interrupted, not looking up from her work. "We understood what it was and how it thought. We positioned ourselves accordingly." She held up a piece of meat. It was still dripping. "You want to know the difference between your species and mine? You run from apex predators. We eat them." The smell of the roasting meat filled the area, a primal, ancient smell. "This one's tougher than usual," Sarah said to her companion, "but it's got more flavor." The hegemony soldiers left the outpost in silence. None of them filed a report. The ones that tried to found their communications logs corrupted. Chapter 6. The Break in Silence. At 95 hours, 42 minutes, and 7 seconds, the silence ended. The Vraxian hegemony's main fleet, positioned near Earth's orbit, received a transmission. It came from the planet itself. It came from Admiral Leto Warren, a woman who had been waiting in the darkness for longer than Torvin had been alive. "The protocol of perpetual patience is concluded," the transmission stated, voice calm and measured. "You have 14 minutes to surrender all weapon systems. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination of the ultimatum. Subsequent actions are unilateral and without further communication." Vax's crystalline structure seemed to crack. "They've been counting down our response time, as if we were a machine to be reset," he realized. "They've been watching every move, every firing solution, every targeting calculation, and we never even knew." Torvin was already screaming, "Sir, multiple contacts emerging from Jupiter's radiation belts. Solar interference. No, not interference, deliberate masking. They're using the radiation as a shield." The tactical grid didn't flicker. It shattered. 27 dreadnoughts emerged from the void. Massive, industrial, uglier than anything the hegemony had ever seen. These weren't elegant ships designed for empire. These were tools designed for one purpose: termination. "Were these vessels?" Vax demanded. "Unknown class," the tactical officer stammered. "Hull composition appears to be layered composite materials. No biocircuitry, no organic components, purely mechanical. They're like mountains made into weapons." The lead ship transmitted a single statement. "I am the USS Vindicator. I am authorized to negotiate by any means necessary. You will stand down. You will power down all weapons. You will stand down, or I will turn your fleet into expanding clouds of superheated gas." Vax made his first mistake. He ordered full power to weapons and shields. Chapter 7. The Moon Opens. But the dreadnoughts weren't the final revelation. As the Vraxian fleet began to power up, a signal came from Earth's moon itself. "This is Admiral Warren again," the transmission stated. "I need to show you something. Don't panic when you see it." And then, the surface of the moon began to move. Massive doors, each 1 kilometer across, ground open along the lunar equator. The moon wasn't a celestial body. It was a machine, a shipyard, an industrial facility carved into an airless rock over the course of 800 years. From the interior, illuminated by the light of fusion furnaces that had been running in the absolute dark, came more ships. Hundreds of them. Not dreadnoughts. Smaller, faster, more agile. support vessels, fighters, supply ships, an entire civilization's worth of military hardware, built in secret while the galaxy assumed humans were primitive farmers. The USS Vindicator itself rose from the moon's core, the flagship of the Sleeper fleet, and took position at the center of the human formations. For 800 years, Warren transmitted, we waited, we built, we planned, not because we wanted war, because we needed to ensure that if war ever came to us, we would win it so completely that no species would ever dare challenge us again. She paused. Your ultimatum was the last miscalculation this hegemony will ever make. Vax's crystalline structure began to resonate with a frequency that his body couldn't control. Fear. Pure, absolute fear. Not of the weapons. Of comprehension. Of understanding that he had been playing a game against an opponent who had been playing that game for longer than his species had even discovered spaceflight. Shields up, he screamed. All weapons. But it was already too late. Chapter 8. The Hour of Calculation. The humans didn't use energy weapons. Energy weapons were imprecise, requiring shields, allowing for evasion. The humans used relativistic kill vehicles. RKVs were simple in concept. Take a chunk of material, titanium, tungsten, depleted uranium, it didn't matter. Accelerate it to 0.95 light speed and fire at a target. At that velocity, kinetic energy replaced any need for explosives. The impact was indistinguishable from magic. The Vraxian flagship, the final warning, was struck by 3 RKVs in succession. The first one punched through the forward shields and the reactor shielding both. The ship's power died instantly, leaving it a coasting hulk. The second one hit the command bridge, venting the atmosphere and killing everyone there except Vax, whose crystalline structure somehow remained intact despite exposure to the void. The third one hit the engine core and simply vaporized it. Around the flagship, the rest of the Vraxian fleet was suffering similar fates. Not explosions. The kinetic slugs moved too fast for explosions. The ships simply ceased, their structure unable to maintain cohesion against impacts that released energy equivalent to tactical nuclear weapons. Human boarding shuttles, not elegant, not beautiful, but utterly functional, punched through the remaining hulls. The Iron Wall Company emerged, soldiers in powered armor, moving through the hegemony's corridors with the speed and precision of trained professionals. They didn't kill indiscriminately. They secured engineering sections, medical bays, command centers. They were salvaging a fleet, not committing genocide. Within 60 minutes, the Vraxian hegemony's military presence in Sector 7739 ceased to exist. Of the 200-ship armada that had arrived, only 17 vessels remained functional. These ships were allowed to stand down. Their crews were allowed to survive. One ship, the Swift Revenge, a fast courier vessel that had been positioned at the rear of the fleet, was permitted to escape entirely. It would carry news back to hegemony space. The news that humanity had returned. Chapter 9. The Face of Mercy. Admiral Lita Warren stood in the observation deck of the USS Vindicator, looking down at the crippled Vraxian flagship. She was a woman of 84 standard years, with gray hair pulled back in a military bun and eyes that had seen the construction of a civilization in the dark. She had authorized the use of exactly 14,473 kinetic slugs. She could have used 50,000. She had calculated, to the meter, the precise amount of force necessary to cripple the hegemony without committing genocide. This was mercy. A human marine entered and saluted. "Ma'am, we've secured the Vraxian command staff. High Arbiter Vax is among the survivors. He's requesting to speak with you." Warren considered this for a long moment. "Prepare a shuttle. I'll meet him aboard his flagship. Single escort." "Ma'am, that's an order, soldier." Carried out. 20 minutes later, Admiral Warren walked onto the bridge of the final warning. The ship was a tomb of emergency lighting and vented atmosphere. Corpses drifted in the zero gravity like leaves in a winter wind. High Arbiter Vax stood in the center of the bridge, crystalline structure intact but dimmed, as if his essential light had been switched off. Around him, his surviving staff lay or floated, wounded or dead. "Your people died because you brought them to my home," Warren said flatly. "That's not tragedy. That's accountability. Why didn't you destroy us all?" Vax asked, his voice a broken harmonic of crystal under stress. "Because we're not monsters," Warren said. "We're worse. We're predictable. We're a species that makes decisions, and we commit to them entirely. You brought an ultimatum to our doorstep. We responded to the ultimatum. Now you have to live with the response." She handed him a data core. It was small, no larger than a human fist, but it contained 800 years of history. "On this core is everything," Warren continued. "The civilizing war, the treaty, why we withdrew, what we built, why we waited, and at the end, a message. A single message that applies to every species in this galaxy." "What is it?" Vax whispered. "No species enters human space. That is the rule. And the borders exist for your protection, not ours." Chapter 10. The protocol spreads. Within 14 days, the Swift Revenge reached hegemony space. The data core was distributed to every military commander in the Vraxian military structure. Within 30 days, the Conclave of Sovereign Worlds received copies through diplomatic channels. Within 60 days, the entire galaxy was learning the same lesson. The borders around human space were marked with ancient warning buoys, inscribed in 12 dead languages. They had been placed there 800 years prior, after the civilizing war had shown the Vraxian hegemony and the Galactic Council what humanity was truly capable of. But the new generation of species had forgotten, or had assumed the warnings were exaggeration. Now, the warning had been rewritten, not in 12 languages, but in one universal language, the language of demonstrable force. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had not attempted to expand beyond their borders. They had simply shown every species with ambitions towards Sector 7739 what would happen if those ambitions were pursued. The Terran Compact was formed in the aftermath, an alliance of 50 systems united by a principle: equality, not hierarchy. In the Compact, resources were distributed fairly. Pain relief was given based on need, not status. Technology was shared. Trade was conducted on terms of mutual benefit. The Conclave began to hemorrhage members. Alara Voss was reinstated as the first ambassador of the Terran Compact. She sat at a new table, not in the Conclave chamber, but in a station of her own construction, halfway between human space and council space. The station was called the Bridge of Understanding, though both sides privately called it the Buffer Zone. Dr. Althea Vass received official recognition for her actions on Perseus Reach. The hegemony's impum was formally abolished by the Council, not out of humanitarian concern, but out of fear. The woman who had been willing to defy a military inspector had been proven right in the most violent way possible. The Iron Wall Company, led by a man named Dale Carver, became something of a legend. They were mercenaries, but they were mercenaries who solved problems with psychology before they solved them with weapons. When they were asked, years later, how a force of 41 humans could dismantle military organizations 10,000 strong, Carver gave a simple answer: because they all thought like they had already won. We thought like we'd already lost. When you've already accepted losing, you see possibilities that winners never do. Epilogue. 50 years later. Sarah Chun was old now. She sat in a garden on Earth, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. Her son, Marcus Chun, sat beside her. "Do you think they finally understand?" she asked. "Which part?" Marcus replied, "That we were patient, that we were prepared, that we were willing to wait 800 years if necessary." "All of it," Sarah whispered. "Yes," Marcus said. "They understand, because the cost of not understanding was demonstrated in a single hour, and every species in the galaxy watched that demonstration." He paused, watching waves. But understanding and acceptance are different things. It's only been 50 years. Some of them still hope that next time will be different. Next time, they'll catch us unprepared. Next time, they'll find a weakness. Will they? Sarah asked. No, Marcus said, with absolute certainty. Because the weakness they're looking for is mercy. And mercy requires an opponent to be willing to use it. We learned a long time ago that mercy is just another weapon. It's just slower. The sun set over the Pacific, somewhere in orbit. The Guardian ships maintained their vigil. Not attacking, not threatening, simply present, eternal, patient. The protocol of perpetual patience would never be needed again. The fact that it existed was enough.